Caricom leaders say they have taken important steps to overcome inequalities and deepen integration as they end their summit in Barbados. Protests over the suspension of elections in the Dominican Republic are met with tear gas by the police. And Bolivia's electoral authority insists it hasn't yet excluded Evo Morales and other top mass candidates from standing in the elections. Hello, welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito, and this is From the South. The 31st intersessional meeting of Caricom heads of government has come to an end in Barbados, with a focus on deepening integration and overcoming disparities among the 15 member states. The leaders discussed their response to the outbreak of the coronavirus and the elimination of taxes on transport and trade, as well as a new regime for roaming rates across the Caribbean. They also debated a proposal for a Caribbean-African forum. Prime Minister Mia Mottley, as the current chair of Caricom, said evening out the inequalities between the poorer and richer member countries would be a pillar of Caribbean integration.
One of the problems that has bedeviled the community for some time has been the issue of the Caricom Development Fund. And we recognize, as I've said over and over, that in any single market, a single economy, there are winners and there are losers. And it is to that extent that Chapter 7 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas speaks to the issue of there being need for a fund to be able to assist disadvantaged countries, disadvantaged sectors, disadvantaged regions. Member states have committed to capitalizing this fund, but this will never be enough to do what needs to be done, particularly with all of the challenges that the region faces at this point in time. Yesterday I outlined a number of them, and we keep seeing new challenges as we did with the COVID-19 virus. And to that extent, therefore, we feel strongly that we need to revisit the structure of the Caricom Development Fund and to enable it to be able to raise additional funds, whether from individuals, companies, institutions, regional countries, and extra-regional countries. So, my friends, I hope that we will appreciate that this policy decision taken by heads of government will make that significant difference, and it will come back to us in the near future. We've agreed that to have 2 meetings a year only is not going to advance the work of the community. And perhaps that is one of the most significant results of this meeting, that we have accepted that we will try to meet at least once a month, even if we do the intervening meetings by means of the technology that connects us. Last year we were able to use the technology in order to bring heads of government together on a number of key issues. It worked extremely well for us, and we believe that this can now be a part of our normal business.
Dominica's Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit has signed 2 regional agreements on the sidelines of the Caricom meeting. These are the Protocol on Public Procurement for the Caribbean Community, which gives individuals and firms the opportunity to bid for public sector contracts in the Caricom single market and economy. Also participating in the agreement on the return or sharing of recovered assets intended to strengthen regional cooperation in this area. British Virgin Islands Premier Andrew Fahie also signed 2 education-related agreements. Protests in the Dominican Republic continued on Tuesday, and this time they were met with tear gas outside the offices of the Electoral Authority. Our correspondent Daisy Toussaint has the latest.
There has been tension in the Dominican Republic since the suspension of municipal elections on Sunday, February 16th, which was followed by 2 deaths and at least 6 injuries. Demonstrations have been held daily in front of the headquarters of the Central Electoral Authority, in which people have demanded the resignation of the board of the institution. Then on Tuesday night, demonstrators began demanding the resignation of the national government, as protesters say that the government was complicit in the fraudulent elections. As those citizens were peacefully protesting, police launched tear gas at those who were standing outside of the offices of the Electoral Authority with placards. They had noisemakers, costumes, pots and pans, among other things. The protesters were yelling that these people must be removed from power, things like "down with the corrupt," and saying that they must step down now. That Central Electoral Board called new elections for the 15th of March. Meanwhile, the Marcha Verde movement said that there are no guarantees and that what happened with the elections this past Sunday is evidence of the broken institutions throughout the country. They also said that the Central Electoral Board is not to be regarded as reliable for carrying out this process, as they had alerted back in October regarding the primary elections.
That was Daisy Toussaint from the Dominican Republic. In other news, striking police officers in the Brazilian city of Sobral have shot Democratic Labour Party Senator Cid Gomes as he was trying to disperse the protest. It is not yet known how serious Gomes' injury is, but according to his staff, he was shot in the chest and is now being treated in a nearby hospital. Dozens of officers of Brazil's military police were demanding an increase in their salaries and set up a blockade in front of a local police battalion. Gomes was driving a tractor trying to disperse the protest when he was shot. Authorities are still investigating whether he was shot on purpose or got hit by a stray bullet. Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Court is denying that it has decided to exclude the former President Evo Morales from standing in May's elections. Earlier on Wednesday morning, the MAS party and various local media reported that the TSE was about to announce the exclusion of Evo Morales and Diego Pari as candidates for the Senate. The right-wing parties and other sectors that supported the coup in November have been pushing hard to have the main candidates of the MAS barred from standing.
The Supreme Electoral Court, in accordance with its norms, is analyzing the cases of all the candidates whose exclusion has been requested. It is doing this as swiftly as possible, with the due process that each candidate and each party deserves, to ensure a fair and transparent electoral process.
Earlier, we spoke with journalist Oli Vargas in Cochabamba, Bolivia, who provided an update on the speculation over whether the TSE may disqualify Morales and other MAS candidates. He says that right-wing groups are exerting pressure to have Morales banned.
Yes, so there's an emergency meeting today being held right now, in fact, of what's known as the Pacto de Unidad, which is the coalition of the social movements that form the MAS. Now, this emergency meeting is about the very real possibility, they say, of key candidates being barred from standing. So at this meeting that's going on now, they'll be deciding what action they'll take if that does occur. But it's likely there'll be a very strong reaction. The MAS is the only organization standing in this election that has the power to mobilize large numbers of people. So it's not going to be a decision taken without consequence. So just yesterday, the Comité Cívico Santa Cruz, which is the largest of the sort of right-wing movements, if you will, they tried to have a meeting with the president of the Electoral Council, where they were demanding that Evo Morales be banned from standing. And the fact that they can sort of walk in and have these meetings shows the power of certain right-wing pressure groups, and they're all working overtime at the moment to get Evo Morales especially banned. And they want to ban Evo Morales because they're very worried that if he goes to the Senate, which he would be elected to if he stands, then he would be able to better bring arguments within the MAS, within the parliamentary group within the MAS, which has been relatively divided at times, and the government has benefited from that. So if Evo is in the Senate, there'll be a much clearer line from the MAS at the level of the lawmakers. So they're very keen to keep him off the ballot paper.
We'll take a short break. When we come back, we have protests in Argentina calling for decriminalization of abortion. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's continue with news. Women in Argentina are holding a day of action to press for the legalization of abortion. Thousands are gathering outside the Congress in Buenos Aires and in dozens of other cities to call on lawmakers to pass legislation. The right to choose was narrowly defeated in Congress last year, but the new government of Alberto Fernández has promised to present a new bill on this issue. Carolina Silvestre has the details from Buenos Aires.
The campaign for the right to legal and safe abortion has called for a national day of action, both in Argentina and around the world, to demand the legalization of abortion. This will be the 8th year running that the campaign has presented a bill for the right to interrupt pregnancy. It was in 2019 that this bill really had a big impact in Argentina and beyond, when it was debated in Congress. On that occasion, more than 700 women's organizations took part in the debates leading up to the vote in the parliament. The women point to the real danger that women face when they are forced to seek backstreet abortions, especially working-class and middle-class women, who don't have access to the same facilities that the rich have. So they have called this demonstration outside Congress, which will come back from its recess on March the 1st, and where both the feminist movement and the new government will be presenting legislation to finally legalize abortion in Argentina. Today's demonstration includes various performances and teachings, as well as the traditional protest with green scarves, and similar demonstrations have been called in over 100 other cities and towns around the country.
That was Carolina Silvestre from Argentina. Now to Chile, where prosecutors have summoned the head of the Carabineros police force to answer accusations of crimes against humanity. Mario Rosas faces 2 cases in connection with police violence against protesters during the last 4 months of revolt against Chile's neoliberal system. The first case was brought by lawyers from the Ombudsman's office in November. They say the cases remain absolutely relevant because the level of police repression has not diminished. And now we have our series, Failure of an Invasion. That is 1 year after the attempt by the opposition in the United States and its chosen representative, Juan Guaidó, to try to force so-called humanitarian aid across the Venezuelan border back on February 23rd. Before they could do that, they had to create the figure of Guaidó himself. So Marilene Garcia looks back.
3 days after Nicolás Maduro was sworn in as president on January 10th, something strange happened. SEBIN, the Bolivarian intelligence service, arrested the opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó without any order.
This was an irregular situation where a group of officers acting on their own account carried out this unauthorized operation against Congressman Juan Guaidó.
What was behind that event became clear 3 months later when the director of SEBIN, General Christopher Figuera, led the failed coup attempt of April 30.
This was someone who was practically unknown in the world of Venezuelan politics, much less outside Venezuela, a sort of clone of U.S. President Obama, who wanted to present himself as a successful young entrepreneur capable of putting everything in order and reordering Venezuelan politics.
The unknown Juan Guaidó appeared on the international media scene, part of a marketing operation that carefully constructed his image, the day before President Nicolás Maduro appeared before the National Constituent Assembly to be formally recognized as the president of Venezuela.
Yesterday, we witnessed a show in which a group of corrupt and treacherous officers from SEBIN very strangely detained him. As soon as I find out about it, I ordered them to be disciplined.
This was the trigger for the strategy that had been developed to make visible the figurehead of the United States plan to put forward a shadow government.
Guaidó's arrest was a false flag operation. There was another one a few days later. On January 21st, 3 days before Juan Guaido was to proclaim himself president, the country awoke to a declaration by a small group of soldiers who tried to make it look like an uprising of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces. Nothing could be further from the truth.
They already had their plan well worked out with what they call humanitarian aid. But since the armed forces were, as always, entirely at peace and the country was at peace, they needed to create some kind of turmoil among the population to justify their subsequent actions.
You asked us to come out and defend the Constitution. Here we are. Here we are. Here we have the troops. Here we have the troops.
The calls to the street fell on deaf ears, but it was the preamble needed by the opposition, following instructions from the United States to stir up the atmosphere and justify what would come next. The intention was always to create a fictitious reality in the media, a permanent feature of the siege against Venezuela.
The opposition doesn't have a government plan to start with. That is why they are so desperate.
One aspect I think is very important, the positioning of the figure of Guaido to dominate the media, and that cannot be done overnight. That requires specific contracts and deals with the domestic and, above all, international media. Guaido is a figure who was tailor-made by the United States.
They tried everything in search of allies. They even tried Diosdado Cabello, the second most important leader of the revolution and vice president of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. This image flew around the world. Juan Guaido heading for a meeting, which he later denied and continues to deny ever took place. This was on January 22nd, one day before Guaido swore himself in as the supposed president of Venezuela.
Let's confirm if that meeting took place and what you talked about.
I have a friend that says that even when you tell the truth, you lie.
Do you think the Constitution says anywhere that the National Assembly can overthrow a president? Do you believe that?
No, of course not, but...
And do you think we are going to let you off so easily?
No, of course not. You have the opportunity to decide and lead a process. Say what you have to say. We have the opportunity to lead this process. I am here so we can meet.
Lies and manipulation were at the center of the strategy, with the support of the United States and the promise that now they would put an end to the revolution and Nicolás Maduro. Only one thing was missing, an unconstitutional president to begin the invasion so often mentioned. So the next step would be for Juan Guaido to declare himself interim president of Venezuela. We will look at that in our next report.
Coming up, who was Marcelino dos Santos and why his death is sad news for Mozambique. Thank you for joining us again. Let's continue. Police used tear gas to disperse protesters in the capital of Guinea, Conakry, as demonstrations against an upcoming referendum continue. The protesters are against the referendum scheduled for the beginning of March, in which people are to vote for a change to the constitution. They say the constitutional referendum is a way for President Alpha Conde to seek a third term in office at the end of 2020. Political parties are winding up campaigning in Togo before presidential elections take place on Saturday. Togo's President Faure Gnassingbé is seeking a fourth term in office. The country's election authorities have cancelled accreditation for the National Consultation of Civil Society of Togo. They accused the Independent Observer Consortium of preparing to interfere in the vote.
Well, security is there to make sure nothing bad happens in the country. That's good, because sometimes tensions have risen at the level of political parties, and we think with security everything is going to be fine.
Candidates have closed their campaigns in Iran as the country waits to vote in parliamentary elections on Friday. Voters will elect 290 members of the assembly in the first round of these 11th parliamentary elections. The second round of the polls is scheduled for May. The election comes amid a serious economic crisis as a result of the sanctions reimposed by the United States. Russia has warned Turkey against attacking Syrian forces after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan threatened to launch an operation in Syria's Idlib province. Erdogan told the parliament an attack was imminent by the end of the month if Damascus fails to withdraw its troops behind Turkey's military positions. His comments came as Syrian troops pressed an offensive on the country's last major rebel enclave. However, the Kremlin said Moscow would object if Turkey acted against the legitimate authorities rather than terrorist groups.
As a result of the Russian-Turkish talks that were held in Moscow yesterday and the day before, yes, the ultimate result hasn't been achieved on how to implement the agreements of the Presidents Putin and Erdogan on the terms of Idlib. We haven't put forward any new demands. We believe everything our leaders have agreed needs to be implemented.
The Turkish president has also condemned the European Union's interference in the Libyan conflict. Following the collapse of ceasefire talks, President Erdogan said the EU had no right to make any decisions concerning Libya. He accused European nations who agreed to launch a UN arms embargo of interfering in the region. After they orchestrated the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, most of those European countries watched passively as Libya fell apart.
I want to specifically mention that the European Union does not have the right to make any decision concerning Libya. The EU is trying to take charge of the situation and interfere.
Marcelino dos Santos, the founding member of the left-wing Mozambique Liberation Front, also known as Frelimo, has been laid to rest in the crypt of the Heroes Square following 7 days of national mourning. A public funeral was held for the revolutionary leader who passed away on February 11th, aged 90, at the Praça dos Heróis Moçambicanos in Maputo. A strong defender of the people, Dos Santos was a veteran of the armed struggle against colonialism. He defended socialism as the only way to fight poverty in Mozambique. Dos Santos also condemned the shift from socialism to a market economy in his country, noting that it would only harm the poor. A crisis in Guatemala's education system is threatening the goal of schools in rural communities of teaching classes for 200 days this year. Parents say this poses a risk to their children's future.
Los 200 días de clase que se estableció, no han empezado los niños.
The goal set by the Ministry of Education is to teach 200 days a year, but they're way behind at rural schools in San Antonio Ceja, Ixcan and Quiche. In fact, schools have been shut for the past 50 days.
Classes began on January 8th for some students as there are limited teachers.
There are more than 240 primary school students here who have not been to school due to a shortage of 8 teachers. The director of the Department of Education could not give a concrete reason why.
Well, it's a large school, and we only have the budget for 6 teachers.
We require at least 15 teachers. The real question is whether or not the director sent a list of what we, in fact, need, and I don't believe he has.
Parents say the lack of teachers demonstrates the precarious education system in this and other marginalized communities in Guatemala.
We, the parents, are trying to find solutions. So far, we've paid for the installation of electricity and the construction of 8 classrooms.
Citizens say the state has abandoned the education system, condemning the people and their communities to a life of misery.
We live in poverty. It's a rural area and we don't have schools. What sort of future can we provide for our children?
It's really sad. Imagine a 5-year-old child who only wants to succeed. The president said the children are the future, but where are the politicians now?
According to social media reports, other remote communities also suffer with no infrastructure, desks or chairs.
And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.